Welcome to Papa's Workshop. In today's video, we're going to talk about tiling. Inventables has a great app to allow you to tile your projects. What I'm going to do today in this video is go through an overview, explain what tiling is. I'm going to show you what you need to do to be able to set up your machine, to be successful, and I'm going to talk about the theory behind tiling. We're going to look at the old way of being able to do it, and we're going to look at the Easel app by Inventables, and we're going to test it out on the XCarve. And we're going to actually carve a sign using the tiling features. So let's get started. A day in the shop with Papa and Papa's Workshop. To support my channel, please go to patreon.com/Papa's Workshop. In today's video, we're going to be doing stage carving, and we're going to be using the new tiling feature in Easel Pro. The first thing I want to do is explain what tiling is. If you have a long project like this project is a little over 6 feet long. This will not fit on the machine all at one time. So what you have to do is break it into sections. Well, the sections can also be called a tile. So we're going to start at the beginning and we're going to carve one section or one tile, have that finished, and then we're going to move to another section and carve that section or tile, and we're going to continue and repeat that process until the entire sign is done. Now what we're going to be doing is using the y-axis to slide this project along to be able to do the carving. Before you start tiling, there's a question that you must ask yourself, is how well is your machine set up? Is it truly accurate? If you tell the machine to move 12 inches, does it actually move 12 inches on the x-axis and on the y-axis? If it doesn't, you need to calibrate it. Now, I'm not going to take the time in this video to go through and do the calibration. I'm going to put a link in the description below to where you can go to the video where I've actually show you step by step on how to calibrate your machine. The next thing I want to talk about is how to establish this y-axis. It's not just good enough to have a square to the front of your machine, because where the machine is may be different than what you actually have on your computer. So your home position may be right down here at the bottom corner, and that's great. But when it gets all the way to the other end, is it at the exact point that the computer thinks that it is? So it's very important to be able to have this y-axis 100% accurate. And one of the things I want to point out, let's just assume right now that this yellow line is my y-axis and that it's correct. If I put a square up on this, then if I look over at 24 inches, there's my point. What happens though, and I've got a line on the back, if I'm about just 1/8 of an inch off? Now over here, I'm going to be off even more than 1/8 of an inch. That can throw off your whole entire project, because the machine is carving based on what it has in Easel. And if your machine doesn't match, you're going to have a messed up project that you're not going to be happy with. Now right now the bit is right down to the table surface itself, and I'm going to mark that point. Now because I don't want to be right on that black line, I'm going to go ahead and move this over just a little bit so it's right between the 2 and the 3. So I went ahead and moved it now, and I'm going to put my dot right back at the edge of the bit. So now let's go ahead and move to the opposite end of the y-axis. Now you also notice that I'm using a very, very fine point on the Sharpie pen. Now what I've done is I've gone from that little small point right there, and I've moved it 30 inches along the y-axis all the way to the back. Now I'm going to go ahead and lower the bit again, and we're going to establish my second point. Now I'm going to go ahead and take my red marker and mark right there. Now that way when I'm working an easel and I need to have easel saying that the machine is right here at this point, yeah, it actually is. Now let's go ahead and take the straight edge and I'm going to connect these 2 points. So just to reinforce this, it's imperative that the machine is perfectly square. And I have a video that shows exactly how to do that. And by doing this process, I know that my y-axis follows exactly what's in easel. Now I have a red line right along this point, and it's exactly where it needs to be. Now for this next step, we need to be able to have this stop blocks, or some people will actually use a strip of wood along here to act as a buffer. So this wood will need to slide along this y-axis. So I'm going to use the bump stops. You may want to use something else, and that's perfectly fine. Now I'm just finishing up putting in my 3rd bump stop. So now the project will be able to slide right along the y-axis and have a perfect registration. If we get up close, you can see that red line, and you can see how the bump stop goes right up to that line. And that's what you're looking for, so that it matches perfect all along that y-axis. Because if this is off, your whole project is going to be off. Tiling is nothing more than dividing a project up into sections to be able to tile. Now in the Easel software, you can take a square and you can block out the space with a 0 cut depth on the portion that you do not want to have cut. And if I wanted to carve just this section, then I would put a square down here with a 0 cut depth, and then I would make another square and I would do the same thing. And I would cover up that portion of the project. I would set my XY 0 position right down here, and then I would tell the machine to be able to carve. And it would carve only this section, because you have a 0 cut depth here and a 0 cut depth in this area. When this was finished, you have your mark here. All you're going to do is slide that down back to your XY 0. We'll uncover the next portion to be able to carve and cover up the section that we do not want to have carved. And then it's just like having a brand new project, and you're going to carve this tile or this section. And that is the basics behind it. Now I'm going to show you this in the computer. So let's go over to the Easel software now and take a look at how you do it in the software based on what I just showed you here. Now here's a look at the entire growth chart, and you can see this light blue area. That's the actual size of the table. Now this blue line for a moment I don't want to even talk about, because I want to show you the old way first before I want to show you the new, improved, fantastic app that we have in Easel. So for right now, if I want to be able to carve this, I have to be able to break it down into a smaller section. So if I want to carve this first section right here, because that's all that will fit onto the table, then I need to set up a square, and I need to be able to make it where I can cover all of the section that I do not want to carve. So for an example, if I want to be able to carve up to that 2-foot line, I can cover that. And let's zoom in now. I can come right down here and I can cover this up, and I can set this square at a 0 cut depth. And because it's extending up here further, I need to make sure that I cover the whole thing, or it's going to try to carve it. So there we go. Now it's not going to carve. The only thing that will carve is this section right here. So let's zoom back in close. Now, one of the things that I like to be able to do when I'm doing it this old way is I have a point measured right down here on my XY0 position on my CNC machine. That's going to be the start point. That's the start point for the machine. And then it's going to follow right along this y-axis. What I want to have happen is for this point to stop at a specific point. And you notice this did not go to 0. We need to make sure it's completely white. So I want to be able to come over here to the shape, and I want to be able to look at where this is. So let's say this on the y-axis is at 24.5. That's where it needs to stop. So when I take and finish carving this section, I want to be able to take that point and move it down. Now, as I've taken my growth chart, I've slid it down and I've created 2 squares. So the first square, I'm going to go ahead and set that for the 0 cut depth. So now that puts it right down here. This one, I need to be able to have it align along this bottom edge, and I need to have it align at the 24 inches. And there it is. So at this point, all I need to do is change the cut depth on this one to my 0 cut depth, and this would be the second tile. You set the machine up where it starts at the XY0 position right here, and it will carve this section, and that's all it'll carve. And remember, underneath here is the first 2 feet, and here's the last 2 feet of my growth chart. Now let's go ahead and look now at the last section, this section hidden behind here. Now because this is the last of the tiling that needs to be done, I don't need to have one up here because it's going to stop automatically. But I do need this bottom portion covered. Now to be able to move this into position, I need to use along this top edge. So that means I need to use one of these 2 selectors right here to be able to follow that. I'll just use that one. I'll go ahead and set that to 0, and it moves it right down. Of course, the last thing I need to do, change this to a 0 cut depth, verify that it's 0, and now I'm ready to be able to carve the last tile. And remember, everything else is down here. It's not going to carve, and it doesn't matter that it's hanging off of the CNC machine, because your XY0 position is right here, and it's going to carve right down to the last portion of the growth chart. Now to show you how I'm going to do that on the CNC machine, let's just say we're doing this last section, and you have a little mark right here at that 4-foot line, and I have a mark right here for my XY0 position. So if I slide this down, right down to where that point aligns, and now I have the point on my project and the point on my wasteboard, or in this case the bump stop, those are aligned. Then I take my square and put it right up to that 0 line, so nothing down here carves, and the CNC machine will only carve this section. So that's how it works, to be able to relate it to the machine versus what's happening in the computer. Now that we've covered the theory behind tiling, and we've actually covered the old way of doing tiling, let's move on to the exciting part now and get into Easel and look at the new feature to be able to do the tiling. It's pretty fantastic. Now when you look at the app, you have this blue line. That blue line is actually going to be the area that would be able to carve on the first tile. And if you look over here on the preview, you see this lighter colored area. That would be the portion that would carve. This other portion would not carve. Let's go over to this section right here, and this is where you're going to see it. This is the window that comes up. Anytime you type in the material size that's larger than what your machine can handle, it's going to break it down into the tiling. And tiling here is oversized material carving to carve the pieces larger than the machine's work area, enter the desired length. So here we have a 7.5 inch wide and we have the 73 inches long. What that did is the computer then broke this down into a 25, 25, and 25 for tier 1, 2, and 3. Further, they also broke it down, so this is tile 1, tile 2, and tile 3. If you look at it in this realm, you would have tile 1 here, tile 2, and then tile 3. The other very nice feature, you can enable the overlaps. So this is actually going from 0 to 24 inches. And you have a 1 inch overlap. And what that does then is sets it up for each of these at the 25 inches. You're going to be able to move it down. So let's just take a look. This one, for an example, I have it checked for the 25 inches. 25 inches is going to cover this first section. So let's take a look at this. You can see the light area, and let's hit simulate. When you hit simulate, you're going to see that this is where it's going to carve, and that is all. Now let's go ahead and set this up now to do tile number 2. If I select tile number 2, it turns off automatically tile 1. And let's take a look at this. Now it shows this light area from the 24 inch point up to, not the 24 inch here, but it goes up one more. So from the very beginning of the sign, this would be 48 inches. But this is a 25 inch section that allows you to have the overlap. And you notice they move the project right down to the XY0 position at the 24 inch mark. So again, let's look at the last section, tile number 3, and you will see that it's going to carve right from this point to there, and that's it. And just to show you, let's go ahead and hit simulate, and you're going to see that it's going to carve from this last point right here, and it's going to carve this section. This is so much easier because you don't have to grab the squares and you don't have to cover it up, because in essence, the computer system does it for you. Even though it's showing out here the section that it's carving, look at what it's doing. It's sliding that project along the y-axis and bringing this start point right down to the 0 position. This is a fantastic feature that I think everybody should be using if you want to do the tiling project. It makes it so simple and so easy. Now when I change the position of it, this is the actual table. This is your overall work area, and you can see again the project is well off of the CNC machine. But this light area is the only area that's going to be carving. It's just like having a big square on top of this section with a 0 cut depth. It basically is doing the same thing for you, only you don't have to do it. The computer's doing all the work for you. So when you first come in with the project, you can see that it's right down here as you designed it, with the XY0 down to bottom left-hand corner. Tiling is not turned on at this point. You don't see the blue line here. But when you go into this section, let's turn on the tiling, and that's when all this other information comes up. That's when you see the blue box over here. That is your design area for what it's going to carve in tile number 1. When we click on tile number 2, the computer moves it down. It tells you exactly where to put it, and it shows you the specific point over here for it to be in. Now I showed you this other feature where it had the overlapping. You can turn that off. Now this overlapping feature is a wonderful tool because it makes it where it will transition between these cut lines. So in this case, we're cutting from the 0 to the 24 inches. You have this 1 inch here that is going to overlap over. So what's going to happen if I turn this off? If I don't want it to overlap, then this is reduced by the 1 inch. It's interesting to note when we set this up, and I'm going to turn tiling back on, we're going to go to tile number 2, and then you will see when you're on tile number 2, it sets it at the 24 inch line, not the 25. The reason being, it's still setting up the 25 inches right here so that you can have that overlap. That transition is going to take place. And when we move to tile number 3, our XY0 position is going to be on this position right here, which is actually 48 inches. So let's take a look and verify that. And there you can see it, where it's actually set right there. And you'll notice that this time we have that 1 extra inch. It's not carving anything, but it's there. And the reason that 73 inches is there is because back over here when I established the length, I had established the length at 73 inches. If this had been changed to 72, the only thing that would have changed is this right here, and it was end right at the end. You'll also notice, because it doesn't divide evenly anymore, that this first one will carve at the 24 inches. And then when we move to tier number 2, you see how it actually drops down an inch and creates your overlap. So either way, you're going to have your overlap if you set this. So in this case, you would set the XY0 at the 23 inches, and then it would be able to carve. And you can see exactly what it's going to carve. And then from the last tier, on tier 3, it's going to do the same thing. You would be setting it right here on this line at that point, and it would carve all the way to the end. So as long as you understand exactly what this square represents and how it is placed on this line, tiling is going to be a very, very easy task. Now for the purpose of this video, I've actually created 2 signs. One sign that can hang horizontal like this that says welcome home. Now when you carve this sign, of course, you're going to rotate it this direction and be able to tile it. And then the second sign that I'm doing is this one right here. And this is the one that I'm actually going to carve today. And I have the stars at the top, welcome home, and then the 2 stars at the bottom. And this way you'll be able to hang this sign vertically and be able to welcome home anyone. And of course on this sign, the second sign, you'll be able to hang this one horizontal. Now on this sign, when I created the letters, I just set up as the text and typed out the welcome, and I put an extra space between each of the letters. Same thing on home. I just typed out the word home, and I used the space between them. And as far as the font that I use, this is it right here. And then it's the stars. I want to show you the stars because I actually create the stars. Now I create the stars using the app for that, the star generator. And the way I do it is I set this up with the 5-point star, and then it's inner radius. This is what moves. You have to be able to adjust this until these stars have a nice straight line. And I have found that usually around 59 is the perfect one. And oftentimes I'll actually go down, let's see, I want to try this, 58. And let's look at 57. And that's a tiny bit better. That looks great. And then I import that in. And when I import that in, then I have literally the perfect star to be able to use for this. And all I do is copy and paste and put them into position. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this one for now. And I want to go back over to this first sign, the one that I'm actually going to carve today. And if you look at this, people often ask, well, how do I get the letters to line up perfectly straight? Well, it's actually very simple. So if I take this letter, and all of these letters are individual, and I lay this out according to where I want it. I know that this board is the halfway point is 2.68 inches because the board itself, after I had trimmed everything down, was 5 3/8 of an inch. So that way I can place the W right at the halfway point, 2.68. And then when I work out the layout, I actually position it on the y-axis, again, at a very specific point. Same way with each and every item on here. The star is at 2.68, and on the y-axis is 68. And then when I do the next star, it's again 2.68, so that means the alignment is perfect, and it's now 4 inches apart. So it's 64 inches instead of 68. And I continue that process through each and every one of these letters. And that way, every single thing in here is at 2.68, so it's dead center on the board. And each letter being individual, I specifically placed it where I wanted it. So if I look at the C for an example, you'll see it's 2.68, 46 inches. So everything is exactly positioned, and it really doesn't take long to do. The last thing that I want to be able to show you here, if I highlight everything, I'm only going to cut this at 0.1 of a depth. Now, because of the size of the stars, I cannot carve those all the way down to where there's a point in the center. Reason being, I would cut through my material long before I would actually reach this point. So for that reason, I have to have a flat bottom. And again, that's going to be 0.1 of an inch. Now, to be able to save time, because I don't want to have a V-bit trying to carve this out, I'm going to do the two-stage carving. I'm going to carve this with the 1/8 inch bit to begin with, and then I'm going to come back with the 90-degree V-bit and finish the stars. So if you look at the different project, and right now this is going to be the area that it carves, I can go ahead and hit simulate. And you can see how that is going to carve. It's going to take 7 minutes to do the roughing pass, and then it's going to come back with the finishing pass for 10 minutes. And that is going to complete that section. So that's what it looks like up close. Now, I want to point out this. This C is going to be cut right in half. And this is going to be the interesting thing that I want to be able to see how this works as I carve this. Quite frankly, if I was using the old style of tiling, instead of breaking it right here on the C halfway through, I would come below or above and come right in between so there was no letters being carved. And that would give a nice clean look. but I want to be able to have this split like this because I want to see just how good that this letter will carve. And the other thing is, this will also tell me exactly how accurate my machine is. So this is going to be a fun portion. So let's go ahead and carve this now. The other thing that I want to be able to experiment with, I am going to home the machine, and then after homing it, we're going to use the bottom left-hand corner as my XY0. As I move through the tiling and I change the bits, I'm going to use the last position, and I want to make sure that that works as well. So this is going to be a very fun project with a lot of different things going on. Now to carve this sign, I'm going to be using a pressure-treated 6-foot fence slat. And this is probably the roughest material that you could probably work with. Now this is 5/8 of an inch thick, and it was bowed quite a bit. So the first thing I did is just planed it down with the joiner to be able to get it flat on one side, and that took multiple passes. Then I took it over to the planer and ran the top side through to be able to get it smoothed up and get the cup that was in this wood out of it. This was a long process. Then I had to take it back over to the joiner and joint each of the edges because they were bowed so badly. After I planed, sanded, and did everything that I could to this board, I put just a real quick coat of paint on it. And I wanted to paint thin because I still wanted to be able to see the grain through it a little bit, and I think this is going to work fine. Now after everything that I did, I still do not have a completely flat board. Down at this end is 0.37 of an inch thick. Over here in the middle, it's about 0.43, and then at the other end is 0.38 on one side and 0.43 inches on the other side. So this is going to be a real challenge to be able to carve, but we're going to go ahead and get this set up to be able to do just that. Now I have a mark right here that I'm going to use for my XY home position. So this is going to be my reference point right here at this point to be able to carve this and move from one tile to the next. Now I have everything set up to be able to carve, and if you recall earlier, I had 3 bump stops in position to be able to act as a guide, and then I went ahead and used my other clamps or my bump stops, and I'm using those as clamps to be able to secure everything down. And of course I have the ones back here. So the project is secured. I'm not using the glue and tape method because I have to slide this project 3 times, and the clamps is going to work much better. Now one of the things that I also had mentioned earlier is that the thickness of this wood still varies quite a bit, and this is actually the thinnest part right here, and I've actually shimmed that up a little bit higher. So we're going to see how that works also. I know a number of you have asked questions in the past, and I said this is one of the ways that you can do it, is actually shim the wood to be able to get it flat. So this is the section that we're going to be carving for this first one. We're going to be carving the bottom 2 stars, the E, the M, and the O. The break is going to be right there in the center, so that's not going to affect any of the letters. Also, if you look over here on this portion, this tile is 24 inches. In addition, I'm going to be doing 2-stage carving. We're going to use the 1/8 inch straight bit to begin with. We're going to carve out the bulk of the material, and then we'll come back and run the detail bit, which is the 90-degree V bit. So that should be a lot of fun to be able to do. The next thing I want to do, because of the design process, I want to make sure that there's nothing out there hiding that I don't see. So I want to be able to go ahead and simulate this, and let's see what it's going to look like. And it's going to start right here at the bottom left corner. It's going to do the carving. It's going to do exactly what we expect. So that is perfect. There's nothing hiding out here that I can't see. I now have the machine homed, so I'm going to go ahead and move it right over to my XY0 position and get that set. And again, I'm using the 1/8 inch straight bit to do the first roughing pass. At this point, I have the bit exactly on the XY0 position. So this is the point that I'm going to use for the carving all the way through. Now to do the Z probe, I moved up on the Y-axis 2 inches, and I moved over 2 inches to be able to get near the center of the board. And I'll do the Z-axis here for this carve. Now at this point, I have to manually move the machine back to my XY0 position because I have not set it yet. So I want to go 2 inches to the left and 2 inches forward on the Y-axis. And that brings me exactly to my XY0 position. And now in the computer, I can go ahead and click Set XY0 Position. So that is now done. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the spindle on and we'll start carving. As you can see, as it starts to carve, it moves all the way to the top of this 24 section tile and begins carving the letters. Now again, this is the roughing pass, so you're not going to see a whole lot. All it's doing is carving out the bottom portion of each of the letters. Using the 1/8 inch straight bit to be able to do the roughing pass was a good choice because the flat bottom of these stars is looking extremely good. I will not have to do any sanding whatsoever with this. It is coming out perfectly smooth. So the roughing pass is now complete. I'm going to go ahead and change the bit now to the 90-degree V bit, and we're going to come back and do this section with the V bit to finish out the letters on this first tile. Now the bit change is complete, and technically this hasn't moved, but you really never know. So let's go ahead and go through the process now, and I'm going to follow the checklist, change this to the detail pass, probe this for the Z height because this is definitely a different height now, and we'll carve the detail pass. Now this time we'll select the detail pass, we'll hit continue. We are using the V bit 90 degree, and we are going to use the probe. One thing you want to make sure of is that there is no dust in this area. If you have accumulation of sawdust in this area, that can change the height of your Z probe, and that would affect the carve. Now the Z probe is completed, and I went ahead and moved the 2 inches back to the left on the X-axis and moved back down to the original Z point. But over here on the computer, rather than selecting the set Z axis, I'm going to select this one that says use the last XY0. That way, if anything has moved at all, it is going to be able to adjust that and use this last position. So now at this point, we're going to go ahead and turn the spindle on and hit the carve. As you can see, it's doing an excellent job to be able to do the detail pass. The O is looking great. Using the 2-stage carving worked out extremely well. This O looks absolutely perfect. The depth of cut worked out extremely well. The way these letters look, the V goes all the way down to a point at the bottom of the letters, and that's what I was wanting it to be able to do. This is very crisp and sharp. I love the actual color contrast. I think using this was a great color choice. This is carving at 50 inches per minute, which is the default setting. I did not change that. Now I want to give a real good close-up look at these stars. This is carving absolutely fantastic. The V-bit is carving right down to the flat bottom, and it's leaving a perfect line. This is the advantage of being able to do a very good Z-axis and having your machine set exactly the way it should be. The other thing I want to point out, these stars also have a very crisp, sharp point on each of the 5 points. That's the way it should look. Well, now it's time for tile number 2. Now I want to zoom in real close. You can see the blue line. That blue line is on 23 inches. I need to be able to move the project board down 23 inches to establish the new XY0 position. So that's exactly on 23 inches. And that's going to be the new XY0 home position. Okay, I went ahead and changed the bit back to the 1/8 inch straight bit. And we're going to go ahead and do tile number 2. And we're going to do the roughing pass. And when you start going through the checklist, the first thing it says is make sure that you've moved it down to 23 inches. So that is a real good check to make sure that you've moved it the correct distance. Now when you're considering doing a project using the tiling method, I want you to think about this as being separate projects, because I think that will be able to be a little bit more manageable for you and be able to make it more comfortable if you think that way. Now the roughing pass for tile number 2 is complete. I went ahead and changed the bit and I'm ready to do the detail pass. And I really like how these letters are sharp and crisp. They look just fantastic. The next challenge is going to be this C, because it's going to overlap and finish the top of the C. Now I'll be able to use the last XY0 position to be able to do this. So it's all going to boil down to how accurate can I move this board down to be able to get it exactly where it needs to be. That is the key to the tiling. Now I've slid the project down again to be able to tile number 3. And I want to be able to let you know it's directly on the 46. And that is the most important part right there. You know, when I was determining which ruler to be able to use, I tried 3 different tape measures, 2 different rulers. All of them had a different measurement, and I settled on using this one, the oldest tool in the shop. It's funny how the oldest tool in the shop is the one that is going to be the most accurate. So make sure you check and double check, because as I had said earlier in the video, if the machine thinks it's at 46 and it's not, then you're not going to get a good carve. Now at this point I want to let you know one more thing. I had to stop and take the board off of the CNC machine because sawdust actually was getting underneath it and starting to cause a problem. Really not a problem in between the tiles, because you still have to come back and measure to that one XY0 position. And at this point I've gone ahead and changed the bit, so we're back to the roughing bit, and I'm going to go ahead and carve the last tile, tile number 3. I still like to hit the simulate in between the carve so I know exactly what it's going to be doing. And I can see down here that it's only going to take about 6 minutes for the roughing pass and about 10 minutes for the detail pass to have this project finished. And again, it tells you exactly where the board needs to be. So please don't overlook this step. Now the probe is complete, and I am going to use the last XY0 position. So now I'm going to turn on the spindle. And as we begin this 3rd tile, consider this like a separate project again, and it's doing an excellent job. This is that roughing pass for the C, and it's looking extremely good. I'm very pleased with how this is turning out. And here's a look at the completed project. I think this is absolutely fantastic. I'm certainly going to be planning some additional tiling projects in the future, just to be able to see all the different things that this new feature in the Easel Pro can do. It really makes tiling easy, and it's a worthwhile project for you to be able to experiment with and expand your horizons. Thank you for watching today, and I certainly hope that you learned something. And if you did, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Until next time, I'll see you on the next project. By the way, let me know in the comments what you think of this project and if you have done tiling in your shop.